The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, jagged shadows across the barren desert. Amelia's horse trotted steadily through the dust, its hooves barely making a sound on the dry, cracked earth. The heat of the day still clung to the land, a relentless weight that settled on her shoulders. She had grown used to it, the suffocating stillness of the desert, the endless horizon, and the oppressive silence. It was the only life she knew. Amelia had been born and raised on a small ranch, far from the bustling towns that dotted the west. Her family had lived on the fringes, isolated and self-sufficient. Her father, a hard man, had taught her to be tough, taught her that survival in the West meant learning to distrust people and trust only herself. She had done that for as long as she could remember, but as she rode through the desert that afternoon, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of something she hadn't felt in years: unease. The town was ahead, just beyond the ridge. Amelia could see the faint outline of buildings, smoke rising from chimneys, the promise of civilization in an otherwise desolate land. She needed supplies, things her small ranch couldn't provide, and there were rumors in town she needed to follow up on. Her father had been gone for months, and it was now up to her to handle what remained of their land. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. But as she neared the town, she saw them, 2 men on horseback, their figures dark against the orange sky. Bandits, without a doubt. They had the look of men who lived outside the law, their faces hardened by years of hard living. They didn't notice her at first, but that wouldn't last. Amelia's hand instinctively went to the revolver at her side. She had learned to trust it long ago. The desert didn't leave room for weakness, and she couldn't afford to make mistakes. The 2 men slowly turned toward her, their eyes narrowing as they saw the lone rider approaching. "Look what we have here," one of the men said, a grin spreading across his face. "A little lady all alone in the desert. You lost, miss?" Amelia didn't flinch. She had faced worse. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. She wasn't lost, but that wouldn't stop them from thinking she was easy prey. "Just passing through." The second man chuckled, clearly amused by her response. "Passing through, huh? Well, this is a dangerous place to be alone. Maybe we ought to keep you company." The first man spurred his horse forward, moving closer. Amelia's hand hovered over her revolver, her fingers tight around the handle. She wasn't afraid to fight back, but she knew there were more of them out here. The odds weren't in her favor. Before she could act, a voice rang out from behind her. "Leave her alone!" The man who had spoken was a stranger, a cowboy, disheveled and drunk, his horse swaying as he approached. He looked like the kind of man who had been on the road too long, someone who didn't care about much, but there was something in his eyes, something that suggested he wasn't as careless as he appeared. The 2 bandits stopped, surprised by the interruption. The first one, clearly annoyed, turned toward the newcomer. "What's this, a drunk cowboy thinking he can play hero?" The stranger didn't flinch. "I don't think," he said slowly, his voice a little slurred. "I know. You mess with her, you mess with me." The tension in the air was thick, but the bandits weren't backing down. The second one reached for his gun, but the stranger was faster. In one smooth motion, he pulled out his revolver and fired. The first bandit crumpled to the ground, a clean shot to the chest. The second man froze for a moment, his eyes wide with shock. Then, with a shout, he turned his horse and bolted, leaving his fallen companion behind. Amelia stood frozen, her heart still pounding in her chest. The man had just saved her life, and yet she couldn't bring herself to feel grateful. The way he moved, the way he handled his gun, it was clear he wasn't just a drunk cowboy. He was dangerous, and she wasn't sure if that was something she could trust. The man rode up next to her, a cocky grin on his face despite the mess he had just made. "Are you all right, miss?" Amelia's hand was still on the handle of her revolver, her gaze locked on him. "I'm fine," she said, though the words didn't come out as confidently as she had hoped. The man didn't seem to care much about her response. "Good," he said, slurring his words slightly. "You're lucky I was around. Or you'd be a couple of feet under right now." He gave her a lopsided grin. "Name's Jack Callahan, by the way." Amelia didn't offer her name immediately. She wasn't sure if she should trust him. After all, in the West, no one helped you for free. There was always a price. Jack laughed at her silence. I know, he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Not exactly the kind of guy you'd expect to be your savior. But hey, you're alive, aren't you?" Amelia didn't respond. Instead, she kicked her horse into motion, moving past him toward the town. She wasn't sure what to make of him, but she wasn't about to stick around to find out. "You're welcome," Jack called after her, his voice filled with a mixture of amusement and something else she couldn't quite place. Amelia didn't turn back. She couldn't afford to get distracted. Not now. There was business to handle in town, and she wasn't going to let some drunk cowboy slow her down. But as she rode toward the town, her mind couldn't help but wonder, who was Jack Callahan and why had he helped her? She had no answers, but something told her she wasn't done with him yet. Amelia's horse clopped steadily down the worn path toward town, its hooves sounding like soft taps against the dry earth. Her thoughts were far from the dusty road beneath her, still swirling with the encounter she'd just survived. Jack Callahan. The name echoed in her mind, but it didn't provide any comfort. He was an enigma, a man whose presence was both unsettling and strangely familiar in the most unnerving way. She couldn't shake the image of him, standing with that lazy grin, his revolver moving faster than anyone would expect from a man so drunk. There was more to him than just a cowboy lost in a bottle. The sun was beginning to dip low in the sky, turning the world golden as she approached the town. A small cluster of buildings nestled at the edge of the desert, a place of lost hopes and fleeting lives. The air was thick with dust, and a couple of men in the distance leaned lazily against wooden posts, watching her as she approached. She barely paid them any attention. She had become used to being watched. The saloon was the first building she passed. She could hear the raucous laughter and the clinking of glasses spilling out into the street, a stark contrast to the quiet, desolate world she had just crossed. Amelia needed supplies. Her ranch was running low, and there was no way to survive in this part of the world without the right tools. Her father had always handled the trading, but now it was her responsibility. As she tied her horse to the post, she caught sight of a familiar face standing outside the saloon. Jack Callahan. Of course, he was here. He leaned against the wall, one boot propped up, the other leg bent as he idly scratched at his stubble. His hat was tipped low, hiding most of his face, but Amelia could still feel his eyes on her. The lazy, casual way he stood was the same as when he'd saved her, but this time there was something more in the air, an unspoken tension. Amelia wasn't sure why he had followed her. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe it was just coincidence, but a nagging feeling told her otherwise. He'd saved her life, but no one did that without wanting something in return. She steeled herself, walking toward the saloon door with a determination that didn't quite match the racing beat of her heart. She had no intention of acknowledging him. She had more pressing matters, but Jack wasn't going to make it easy. "Now wait a minute, miss," he called out, stepping forward with a lopsided grin. His voice was rough, but there was a playfulness to it, one that made her wary. "You're not going to just walk past me after I saved your life, are you?" Amelia stopped, but only for a moment. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze with a mix of wariness and defiance. "I didn't ask for your help, Callahan," she said, keeping her tone steady despite the way her pulse quickened. "I would have handled them." Jack pushed off the wall, taking a step closer. "I'm sure you would have, but the desert doesn't always give you a fair fight. You got lucky I was around." Amelia felt her jaw tighten. He was playing it off like it was nothing, but something told her that wasn't true. He wasn't here just because of some sense of heroism. "Why are you here?" she asked bluntly, her voice cutting through the tension between them. "You followed me." Jack chuckled, though there was no real amusement in the sound. "Did I? Could have sworn I was just out for a drink." He tipped his hat back, revealing bloodshot eyes that for a moment seemed strangely clear. "But since I'm here, why don't you let me buy you a drink?" The question was simple, but Amelia knew it wasn't just about a drink. There was something more behind it, something that made her feel the weight of his presence pressing down on her. "I'm here for supplies," she said, turning back toward the saloon door. "I don't have time for a drink." But before she could step inside, Jack's hand shot out, catching her arm lightly. Not enough to hurt, but enough to stop her in her tracks. "I'm not trying to hold you up, miss," he said, his tone lower now, more serious. "But I'm not the kind of man who lets a good deed go without seeing it through. You got yourself in a mess today, and I reckon it won't be the last time." His eyes darkened slightly, and for a fleeting moment, Amelia saw something else behind them, a history, a burden. "You might need someone who knows how to survive around here." Amelia stared at him, trying to read the lines on his face. He wasn't just a drunk cowboy. There was pain there, something raw. She had seen enough of the world to know when someone was hiding their wounds. She pulled her arm free, but she didn't walk away. Not just yet. "And you think you're the one who can help me?" she asked. Her voice quieter now, less defensive. Jack didn't immediately answer. Instead, he glanced at the saloon door, then back to her, his expression softening ever so slightly. "I don't know if I can help you, but I know what it's like to be in your shoes. And the West doesn't care who you are, it's a game of survival. And you can't win if you don't play the right way." Amelia frowned. "And what makes you the expert?" He shrugged, his easy grin back in place. "I'm not an expert, miss, but I've been around long enough to know the game is rigged." Amelia stood there for a moment, studying him. She didn't want to let him in, didn't want to risk trusting someone like him, But there was a cold, hard truth in what he said. She wasn't naive. She had learned early on that trust was a rare commodity in this world, and it was only a matter of time before she found herself facing the consequences of that reality. "I don't need help," she said, her voice steady again. "But thank you for the offer." Jack tipped his hat with a grin. "All right, miss. I'll let you be for now. But when the time comes, don't say I didn't warn you." With that, he turned and walked back toward the saloon, disappearing inside without another word. Amelia stood there for a moment longer, watching him go before shaking her head and pushing open the saloon door. She wasn't sure what to make of him or what had driven him to help her, but one thing was clear. She hadn't seen the last of Jack Callahan, and whether she liked it or not, she might need him sooner than she thought. Amelia walked into the saloon, the warm, musty air hitting her like a wall. The dim light from oil lamps cast long shadows across the rough-hewn wooden walls, the sound of clinking glasses and low conversation filling the space. She didn't pause to look around. Her eyes were locked on the bar. There, she needed to make her purchase. Get the supplies and get out. She had no time for distractions, especially not from a man like Jack Callahan. Her boots clicked across the floor as she made her way toward the counter. The bartender, a grizzled man with a stubbled chin, looked up as she approached. "Whiskey?" he asked, his voice gruff. Though there was a glint of recognition in his eyes, he had probably seen her pass through before, though she'd never stayed long. Amelia shook her head. "No, just some flour and beans. Whatever you've got that'll keep me going." He grunted and nodded, moving to the shelves behind the bar. Amelia glanced around, trying to ignore the whispers and eyes that followed her every move. The saloon was full of men, rough-looking and mean-eyed, their faces hidden behind smoke and shadows. The kind of men who made their living off the desperation of others. The kind of men who didn't care about anything but survival. Her gaze flicked to the table in the far corner, where a group of rowdy men were playing cards. Jack was sitting at the edge of the table, nursing a drink, his eyes trained on the hand in front of him. He wasn't interacting with the men, but he was there, watching, waiting. His presence felt like an undercurrent beneath everything else. She could feel him, even though he wasn't looking at her. Amelia swallowed hard and turned away, focusing on the bartender as he slid a burlap sack toward her, filled with beans and dried flour. "That'll be $3, he said, his voice flat. She handed him the money without hesitation, keeping her eyes on the sack. But before she could turn and leave, a voice from behind her froze her in place. "You've been avoiding me." Amelia's heart skipped a beat as she turned slowly. There was Jack, standing just a few feet away, leaning casually against the post that separated the bar from the rest of the room. His dark eyes were fixed on her, but there was no humor in them now. The grin was gone, replaced by something more intense, something deeper. "I wasn't avoiding you," she said, her voice steady, but the edge of tension crept into it. "I just have things to do." He took a slow step forward, not in a threatening way, but enough to make her feel cornered. "You're here in the same place I am, and you can't even look me in the eye. That's avoidance, miss." Amelia's hands tightened around the sack of supplies. She hated feeling vulnerable. She hated feeling like someone else could read her so easily. She wasn't sure why Jack was pushing her, but it was clear that he wasn't going to let her brush him off. "I don't need anything from you, Callahan," she said, her voice low but firm. "I don't need your help, and I don't need your company." Jack didn't flinch, his gaze steady and unrelenting. "Maybe not," he said, "but I reckon you'll find yourself needing something before long." She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a loud crash from across the room made her turn. One of the men playing cards had knocked his drink over, spilling whiskey across the table, the glass shattering on the floor. The noise sent a ripple of tension through the saloon. Jack's eyes flicked to the commotion for a moment, and then back to her. "It's never as simple as it looks, Amelia, trust me." He took a step closer, his voice low now, almost gentle. "The West's a cruel place for someone like you." The words landed heavily between them, and for the first time, Amelia felt a crack in her own walls. She wasn't sure what it was about him. Maybe it was the softness in his voice, or the weight behind his words, but something stirred inside her. She didn't want to feel vulnerable, didn't want to let him in, but there was a part of her that understood what he was saying. She couldn't let herself think about that, though. Not here, not now. "I'm not like you," she said sharply, her voice gaining strength. "I don't need anyone to protect me." Jack's lips twitched, a hint of a smile, but it wasn't mocking. "No, you're not like me, but you're smarter than you look if you think you can handle this world on your own." There it was again, the unspoken truth between them, the knowledge that she, too, was a survivor. But survival wasn't something that could be done alone, and she was fighting against a world that didn't care whether she lived or died. She grabbed the sack of supplies with a little more force than necessary, the words she wanted to say caught in her throat. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Amelia could feel the weight of Jack's presence behind her, his eyes still on her, as if he were waiting for her to say something. Instead, she simply turned and walked away, the sound of her boots on the wooden floor a sharp reminder that this wasn't over. It wouldn't be over. She stepped outside into the fading light of the evening, the cool air hitting her face like a slap. The town felt smaller now, and she felt the weight of Jack's words hanging on her shoulders. She could hear the sound of him following behind, but she didn't turn around. "You're not alone out here," he called out from behind her. "And you don't have to be." Amelia stopped, her heart racing again. She didn't know why, but part of her wanted to turn around and face him. Part of her wanted to let him in, wanted to hear what he had to say, but she couldn't. She wouldn't. She didn't need anyone. She had survived this long by keeping to herself, by trusting no one. She had learned that lesson the hard way. "I'll take care of myself," she called back, her voice firm, but inside there was a tremor. She walked faster now, pushing herself toward the edge of town, away from the saloon, away from the dangerous attraction Jack Callahan represented. But in the back of her mind, his words lingered. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. The moon was barely a sliver in the sky when Amelia reached the edge of town. She had the supplies she needed, but the night felt far too quiet, far too heavy. The wind was picking up, sweeping the dust across the street in ghostly swirls. Every step she took away from the saloon felt like a step away from something important. It wasn't just the town she was leaving behind, it was the unsettling presence of Jack Callahan. He was still fresh in her mind, his words replaying over and over. "You're smarter than you look if you think you can handle this world on your own." His voice had been so steady, like he knew something she didn't, a secret buried deep in the land itself. It was hard to ignore that the world wasn't as simple as she'd once thought, but she couldn't afford to listen to him. She couldn't afford to let anyone close. As her horse trotted slowly, the rattle of the saddle was the only sound accompanying her thoughts. The desert stretched ahead, wide and endless, but even the vastness couldn't help her shake the feeling of being trapped. There was nowhere to run from the past, and nowhere to hide from the inevitable reckoning that loomed on the horizon. She reached the familiar trail that led back to her ranch, the place where her father had raised her, and where she had learned the ways of survival. The land was hers now, and she would protect it, but the weight of it, the responsibility, the loneliness, it all felt like too much. Even the simple tasks of tending to the livestock and maintaining the property had become a daily reminder of what she had lost. The moonlight caught on the edge of her rifle. Strapped to the saddle, she reached for it absently, her fingers brushing over the cold metal. A tool of survival, yes, but also a reminder of the violence that lived in this world. Amelia's father had always warned her about the dangers out here, about trusting anyone, about putting faith in others. Trust no one, he had said, not even the land itself. But as she reached the crest of the hill that overlooked the ranch, she saw something that made her heart sink. A lone rider, far off in the distance, was coming toward her ranch. They were too far for her to make out any details, but the shape was unmistakable. The way the rider sat their horse, the steady pace, they weren't just passing by, they were heading straight for her. Amelia's breath caught in her chest. She couldn't make out the rider's face yet, but her instincts were already screaming at her. The last time someone had come to her ranch uninvited, they'd been after more than just a friendly visit. Her grip tightened on the reins, and her gaze shifted back to the ranch. Her father had always made it clear that their land was worth protecting, their family's land, even if it meant violence. Amelia wasn't afraid of confrontation, but she also knew she couldn't face whatever this was alone. She had already turned her back on the only man who had shown any kind of interest in helping her, Jack Callahan. The name burned in her mind once again. He might be trouble, but in that moment, she realized the reality. Trouble was all there ever was out here. She didn't hesitate. Spurring her horse forward, she urged it into a gallop, the wind biting her skin as she moved quickly toward the ranch. As she neared the edge of the property, the rider grew clearer, and her heart sank. It wasn't just any traveler. It was him, Jack Callahan. He was coming for her. Amelia's heart pounded as she urged her horse faster, the animal's hooves thundering against the dirt. The ranch was still a mile ahead, but Jack Callahan was already drawing closer, his figure growing clearer in the moonlight. She could see the confident way he sat atop his horse, his dark eyes fixed on her, his movement steady and deliberate. She wasn't ready for this. She didn't want to face him, didn't want to deal with the confusion he brought, but there was no running now. The dust from his horse kicked up in the air, and she could hear the steady beat of his approach. He was coming for her, and in the back of her mind, she knew it wasn't just a coincidence. He'd followed her, and now he was here. Her mind raced. Why? What did he want with her now? And why did it feel like the moment she had pushed him out of her life was the very moment he decided to intrude? She glanced back at him, her expression hardening as their eyes met. Jack wasn't in a hurry, though he didn't push his horse to a gallop. He seemed calm, too calm for a man who had just ridden into enemy territory. "You really think you can get away from me that easily?" he called, his voice cutting through the night air. His words were casual, but there was a dark edge to them. "You're not going to be rid of me that quickly." "Miss Amelia." Her pulse quickened. She forced her horse to turn sharply, riding hard toward the barn. The wood creaked in the distance, and the scent of the earth mixed with the faint smell of leather and hay as she slowed. There was a moment of silence as the horse's hooves slowed to a soft trot. Amelia's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The last thing she wanted was to face him, yet here he was, standing at the edge of her life like a storm she couldn't outrun. Jack was now just behind her, but he stopped at the barn's entrance. The sound of his horse's heavy breath was the only thing Amelia could hear, and she could feel his gaze burn into her back. "Amelia," he said, and there was something in his voice, something that made her pause. It wasn't the same easygoing tone from earlier. It was deeper, more serious. "We both know this isn't over." She didn't turn around. She didn't want to face him, not yet. But she couldn't push him away either. Not with him standing there, taking up the space in her life she had tried so desperately to guard. "Why are you here, Callahan?" she asked, her voice flat but sharp, like a knife hidden in her words. She kept her back to him, focused on the barn door in front of her. "You've made your point. I'm alive and I don't need you looking over my shoulder." Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, there was a long stretch of silence between them, and she could almost feel the tension crackling in the air. Finally, he spoke, his words slow and deliberate. "You don't get it, do you?" he asked, stepping closer to her. "You think you can just keep running, keep pretending you're some lone wolf out here in the desert? That's not how it works. This land—" He paused, and Amelia could hear the bitterness in his voice. "This land will swallow you up if you're not careful." She stiffened at his words. Her hands tightened around the reins of her horse, as if it might anchor her to the ground. She had been living that reality for years, fighting for what little she had, fighting against a world that didn't care whether she survived or not. But the land was hers, her family's, and she would be damned before she let anyone take it from her. "I can handle it," she snapped, turning to face him finally, her chin high, her gaze hard. "I don't need help from anyone, least of all you." Jack shook his head, his expression unreadable. "This isn't about needing help, Amelia. It's about knowing when you can't do it alone. The West doesn't care if you're strong or stubborn. It'll break you all the same." She tried to ignore the gnawing feeling that tugged at her chest, but his words kept hitting too close to home. The truth was, she wasn't sure she could keep going. Not like this. She had been holding everything together with the thinnest thread, just barely managing to keep the ranch going. The land her father had left her, it was her responsibility now. But it wasn't enough. It had never been enough. Jack stepped closer, his boots kicking up dust with each step, and for the first time, Amelia saw something in his eyes, something that wasn't just anger or bitterness. There was understanding there, too. A strange, fleeting kind of sympathy that made her stomach twist. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly, his voice low. "I know you think you do, but you don't." For a moment, Amelia's breath caught. She looked at him, the silence between them hanging heavy. She didn't want to let him in, didn't want to admit that his words were right, but it was like he could see right through her, the vulnerability she had buried so deep inside, the parts of her that were breaking, even as she tried to hold them together. She swallowed hard, trying to push the tightness in her throat away. "What do you want? Callahan?" she asked, her voice shaky now. "Why are you really here?" Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked past her, his eyes scanning the ranch behind her, as if he were weighing something in his mind. The tension between them was almost suffocating. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter, almost like a confession. "I'm here because I know what it's like to lose everything," he said, his eyes now locked onto hers. "And because you're making the same mistake I did, thinking you can carry it all alone." Amelia opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The words stuck in her throat. She wasn't ready to admit the truth, not to him, not to anyone. But Jack was right. She could feel it now, deep inside. She was at the edge of something, teetering between survival and collapse. But could she trust him? Could she trust herself to let him help? Jack's eyes softened, and for the first time since they had met, there was no hint of the cocky, reckless cowboy. There was only a man who had been through the fires of this unforgiving world, someone who understood the weight of it all. And Amelia found herself wanting to believe him, but she couldn't. "Not yet. Just go," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly, betraying her resolve. "I'll handle this myself." Jack didn't say another word. He simply turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the darkness as Amelia stood there, alone once more. But this time, she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep standing on her own. The night air grew colder as the moon climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows over the land. Amelia stood in the doorway of the barn, watching Jack's retreating figure fade into the darkness. His words still echoed in her mind, like a haunting refrain. "You're making the same mistake I did, thinking you can carry it all alone." She didn't want to believe him. She didn't want to admit that she might be as lost as he was, but deep down a part of her knew he was right. She couldn't do this forever, not by herself, but the thought of letting someone in, of relying on another person, was too terrifying to even entertain. Her father had always taught her that trusting others was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had built walls around herself for so long, her own fortress of isolation. She didn't know how to let those walls down, even if she knew it might mean survival. She sighed deeply, looking out over the ranch. The flickering light from the house seemed like a distant reminder of everything she was holding on to. It felt fragile, as if a single gust of wind could shatter it all. Amelia turned away from the door and moved to the corner of the barn, where her father's tools and old belongings were stored. She ran her fingers over the worn wood of the shelves, each item holding a memory of him, of the days before things had become so complicated. Her eyes lingered on the rifle her father had passed down to her, the one that had seen countless use in defending their land. She ran her hand over the cool metal, her thoughts darkening. The familiar weight of the rifle offered little comfort tonight. Instead, it felt like a reminder of all the battles she had fought, alone, and all the ones she knew were still waiting for her. She jumped as a sound broke the silence, the soft rustle of hooves outside. Her heart skipped a beat, and instinctively, her hand went to the revolver at her side. Was it him again? Jack Callahan? Or someone else? The barn door creaked, and before she could react, a figure stepped inside. It wasn't Jack. It wasn't anyone she recognized immediately, but the man's dark eyes locked onto hers, and her blood ran cold. The tall, lean figure was dressed in worn, faded clothes, his face partly obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know him, but there was something familiar about the way he moved, something that made her gut twist in recognition. "You've got company," the man said, his voice low and gravelly, almost mocking. He didn't step any closer, but stood just inside the barn, blocking the exit. Amelia's hand tightened around the revolver. "Who are you?" Her voice was sharp, but the fear bubbling in her chest made it tremble slightly. The man smirked as if he found her question amusing. "Name's Will Porter," he said, "and you've got a problem." Her heart skipped a beat at the name. Will Porter. She'd heard the stories. Everyone had. He was a man no one crossed. A dangerous one, with blood on his hands. Someone who had made enemies in every town, every saloon and every desert the West had to offer. And now he was standing in her barn, looking at her like she was the next prize to be claimed. "What do you want?" Amelia asked, her voice steady now, but the storm of thoughts in her mind made it hard to focus. This wasn't just any man standing before her. He was part of the tangled mess she was desperately trying to escape. Porter stepped forward, just enough to make her step back instinctively. He didn't touch her, but his presence was overpowering. "I'm here because of a little thing called justice," he said, his lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You see, there are people who don't take kindly to the way your family's been running things." Amelia's heart pounded. "You're talking about my father," she said flatly. It wasn't a question. Porter's eyes narrowed. "I'm talking about what your father did to mine," he corrected, his voice growing colder. "He killed my family, and I've been waiting a long time for this. I've come to collect." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. The story her father had kept hidden, buried deep beneath layers of silence and lies, was coming to light. She'd never known the full truth. He had kept it from her, kept it from them both. But now, standing before this man, the weight of it crushed her. Her own bloodline was wrapped up in this violence, this cycle of revenge. "I didn't kill anyone," she whispered, though she didn't believe it herself. It wasn't her father she was defending. It was the legacy he had left her, one that was now stained with more blood than she had ever known. Porter stepped closer. "You might not have killed anyone, but you're gonna pay for what's been done. It's the way of the West, girl." He gave a cold laugh. "I figured your father's little girl would be more like him, fighting for the land that's rightfully ours." Amelia's hand trembled slightly on the revolver, but she didn't pull it out. Not yet. She couldn't. Not when she wasn't sure what to do. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice hoarse now, barely above a whisper. Porter grinned, a predator's smile. "I want you to understand something," he said softly, stepping closer until they were inches apart. "You can fight me. You can fight anyone. But in the end, you won't be able to protect this land without paying the price for your father's sins. The price is me, and what I decide to take." Amelia's heart slammed against her ribs as the weight of his words sank in. She was trapped. There was no way out of this. The truth was finally here, and it wasn't just about her. It was about the violence her family had left behind, the debts they hadn't paid. "Get out," she said, though her voice cracked. "Leave before I make you." Porter's smile faded slightly, but his stance remained unshaken. "I'm not going anywhere, not until I get what I came for." Her pulse hammered in her ears, and everything inside her screamed to run, but she couldn't. The ranch, her family's legacy, the land, it was all she had left, and it wasn't just hers to lose. As he stepped forward again, Amelia's hand tightened on the revolver. She wasn't going down without a fight. Not now. The night seemed to stretch out longer as Porter moved closer, his boots softly crunching against the hay-laden floor of the barn. Amelia's hand tightened around her revolver, her finger just brushing the trigger, but she didn't draw it yet. Her heart pounded in her chest, the familiar rush of adrenaline flooding her veins. She wasn't about to back down, not when everything was on the line. Porter stopped just a few feet from her, his eyes never leaving hers. There was something cold and calculating in his gaze, something that told her he wasn't here to talk, and Amelia knew better than to think she could reason with a man like him. The West didn't give second chances. It wasn't about justice, it was about survival, and if she wasn't careful, she'd lose everything she'd fought for. "I don't want any trouble," Amelia said, her voice low and steady, though she could feel the tremor of fear crawling through her. "Take your men and leave. This isn't your fight." Porter's lips twitched into a smile, but it wasn't kind. "It's already my fight, girl. It's been my fight for a long time." His hand hovered near the pistol at his side, but he didn't draw it. Instead, he seemed content to watch her, to see how far she'd go before she cracked. Amelia's gaze never wavered. She couldn't afford to show weakness, not now. She had to stand tall even if she felt like she was about to collapse under the weight of it all. Her father's past, Jack's words, Porter's presence. It was all coming to a head, and she didn't know if she could keep it together much longer. "You think your father's blood is the only thing I'm after?" Porter asked, his voice soft, almost conversational. "You're wrong. I came for something more." Amelia frowned, confusion flickering in her chest. "What more could you want? My father's dead. He's gone. You've got nothing left to collect." Porter chuckled, low and mocking. "That's where you're wrong, sweetheart." He took another step forward, his face now inches from hers. "Your father's sins didn't die with him. They lived on in you, in this land." He looked around the barn, taking in the familiar surroundings, the faded tools, the barrels of hay. "And you think you can just carry it all alone? You think that's enough?" His words cut through the air like a blade. Amelia's stomach churned. She knew exactly what he was saying. She'd been carrying her father's legacy all her life, and now it seemed that legacy was coming to collect on its debt. "I'm not my father," she said, the words slipping from her mouth before she could stop them. "I didn't ask for this." Porter's expression softened, but not in sympathy. "Doesn't matter. You're stuck with it, just like I'm stuck with the blood on my hands. You've got a choice, Amelia. You can fight, or you can hand it over. But either way, this ends tonight." Amelia's heart raced, her mind spinning. The land, the family, her father's choices. It was all starting to feel like it was closing in around her. She had spent so many years trying to avoid it, but now it was right here, demanding her attention. Demanding. And the worst part? She didn't know if she was strong enough to fight it. "I'm not handing over anything," she said firmly, her grip tightening on her revolver. "Not to you." Porter's smile widened, but there was no humor in it. "You don't have much choice, girl. You can try to shoot me, but you won't survive this fight. Shall make sure of it." The silence that followed was deafening. Amelia's breath came in shallow gasps, her mind racing, her heart beating in a steady rhythm of fear and defiance. She couldn't let him win. She couldn't let him take what was hers, what her father had left behind. Her hand moved instinctively to the revolver, the cold metal cool against her palm. She wasn't a fool. She knew she couldn't win this battle with force alone, but maybe, just maybe, she could make him see she wasn't as easy to break as he thought. Without warning, she swung the revolver around, aiming it directly at Porter. "You don't know what you're dealing with," she said, her voice shaking with adrenaline and fury. "I'll kill you before I let you take this land." Porter's eyes flicked down to the gun, then back up to her. For a moment, neither of them moved. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, to Amelia's surprise, he laughed, a low, dark laugh that sent chills crawling down her spine. "Oh, you really think you can stop me with that?" he taunted, stepping forward despite the barrel of the gun aimed at his chest. "You're not the first to point a gun at me, girl, and you won't be the last." But Amelia didn't waver. She couldn't. She wouldn't be intimidated anymore. "You're wrong," she said, her voice steady now. "I'm not like anyone else you've faced, and I'm not backing down." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Porter seemed to consider her. The mocking smile faded from his lips, replaced by something more dangerous, something that made her realize just how far he was willing to go. For a long, tense second, the two of them stood there, eyes locked. The only sound was the wind whistling through the cracks in the barn, carrying the weight of everything unsaid between them. Then, finally, Porter spoke, his voice low and cold. "We'll see, Amelia. We'll see how long you can hold on to that gun." He turned and walked toward the barn door, his boots heavy against the floor. "But remember this," he called over his shoulder, his voice fading as he moved away. "This fight is only just beginning. You can't outrun what's coming for you." Amelia stood frozen, her hand still clenched around the revolver. She didn't lower it until she was sure Porter had gone. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her family's sins bearing down on her, the land and its legacy pressing on her chest like a weight too heavy to carry alone. She knew the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun, and this time, she wouldn't be fighting alone. The wind howled through the open cracks in the barn, the only sound filling the oppressive silence that followed Porter's departure. Amelia stood frozen, her revolver still gripped tightly in her hand, her heart pounding in her chest. The words he had spoken echoed in her mind. "You can't outrun what's coming for you." She didn't know if they were threats or warnings, but she couldn't ignore them. She couldn't afford to. The ranch, the land her father had fought to protect, had always felt like a safe place, isolated, untouched by the dangers of the world beyond. But now, the land seemed to suffocate her. The weight of it all, her father's past, Porter's vengeance, Jack's words about not being able to do it alone, it was all coming crashing down. Amelia lowered the revolver and turned back toward the barn door, the cool night air biting at her skin. She had to figure out what to do next. She couldn't stand here forever, and she couldn't let Porter take everything from her. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. Her mind was racing as she stepped out into the cold night. The ranch spread out before her, the fields of dry grass swaying in the breeze, the silhouette of the barn stark against the darkened sky. The feeling of being watched lingered, and her instincts told her that this wouldn't be the last time Porter would make an appearance. She couldn't wait around to see what he did next. She needed to act now. Her horse was still tied to the post near the barn. The ride to town was long and grueling, but it might be the only place she could find any answers. She could gather more supplies, and maybe, just maybe, she could get a sense of what had really been happening in the towns nearby. Porter's presence was only the beginning of whatever was brewing. The West had always been unforgiving, but now it felt like it was closing in, as if it had made her its next target. She saddled her horse quickly, moving with practiced ease despite the weight pressing on her chest. There was no time to waste. As she mounted the horse and spurred it into a quick trot, she glanced back one last time at the ranch. For the first time, it felt more like a cage than a home. The ride into town felt longer than it should have. The wind cut through the air, stinging her face, but Amelia didn't slow. Her thoughts were heavy, weighed down by everything that had happened and everything still looming ahead. Jack Callahan's words kept creeping into her mind, as much as she tried to shove them away. "You don't have to do this alone." She knew she couldn't rely on him, not after what had happened. But there was a part of her that wished he was there now, that he could show up out of nowhere and offer some kind of help, some kind of direction. But she couldn't count on anyone but herself. The world had taught her that. She had no room for distractions, especially from a man like Jack. By the time she reached the town, the sky had darkened further, the last remnants of daylight vanishing behind the distant mountains. She pulled her horse up just outside the saloon, the familiar clink of glasses and low murmurs from inside spilling out into the quiet street. The air was thick with the scent of whiskey and smoke. Amelia hesitated for a moment, her hand resting on the reins, her mind racing with the possibilities of what she might find inside. Was Jack still there? What kind of trouble was brewing that she didn't see yet? She steeled herself and dismounted, tying the horse to the post outside. As she stepped toward the saloon door, the sound of a voice stopped her dead in her tracks. Well, look who decided to show up. It was Jack. His voice was smooth, but there was something in it now, something she couldn't place. She turned slowly, her eyes narrowing as she saw him standing just outside the saloon, leaning against the frame of the door. He looked different, darker somehow. The grin was still there, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "What are you doing here?" Amelia asked, her voice sharp but cautious. She had no patience for games right now. Jack didn't step closer, but he didn't step back either. Came to make sure you were still breathing, he said with a shrug. Figured after your little standoff with Porter, you might need someone who knows what they're doing around here. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't told anyone about what happened with Porter. How did he know? Word gets around fast, Jack continued, as if reading her thoughts. Especially when a man like Porter is involved. He's got a reputation, you know, and he's not one to walk away quietly. Amelia looked him up and down, still wary. I don't need your help, she said firmly. I've handled things before and I'll handle it now. Jack smirked, but this time it wasn't as light-hearted as before. I don't know, Amelia. Looks to me like you're in over your head. He stepped closer now, closing the space between them. His voice dropped to a whisper. Porter's not going to stop. He's got more men, more allies, and they'll come for you, your land, everything you've got, and I don't know if you can protect it all by yourself. His words stung, but they weren't new. She knew the risks. She had always known them. Still, hearing them come from him made it feel realer, sharper. I can protect it, she said, but it was quieter this time, more uncertain than she wanted it to be. I will protect it. Jack paused for a moment, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to see something deeper, something he couldn't quite reach. Then let me help you. I won't get in your way, but I won't let you fight this alone. Amelia stared at him, torn between the stubborn part of her that wanted to send him away and the small voice in her head that was beginning to consider the possibility of what he was offering. I don't need saving, Jack, she said quietly, her voice hardening again. I never have. Jack didn't argue. He simply nodded, his eyes softening slightly. All right then, but when it all falls apart, and it will, you'll know where to find me. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving her standing there, caught between pride and desperation. She wanted to refuse him, to push him out of her life for good, but deep down, she knew that in the end, she might not be able to do it alone. She had no choice but to keep moving forward, but whether she could survive the storm coming for her was still uncertain. The saloon was a quieter place now, the usual raucous noise dampened by the late hour. Amelia stood near the bar, her fingers idly tracing the rim of the glass she hadn't touched. She had come to town hoping for answers, but all she had gotten was Jack Callahan's cryptic words and the feeling of being cornered. It felt like the weight of the entire West was bearing down on her, and she had no idea how to carry it. The truth was, she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep fighting. Every decision, every move seemed to lead to more trouble. She had a ranch to protect, but there were forces closing in. Porter, his men, and now Jack, who seemed to be offering help one moment and pulling away the next. She didn't know who to trust, and she didn't know if she had the strength to trust anyone at all. Amelia turned the glass over in her hand and sighed, the sharp sound of her boots against the wooden floor the only thing breaking the silence around her. The night felt heavier now, the weight of it pressing in like a storm on the horizon. She had been living in the eye of that storm for too long, and she could feel it beginning to swirl, picking up speed. Thought you might be here. The voice came from behind her, low and familiar, and it took everything in Amelia not to flinch. She knew who it was without turning. She had expected him to show up again, even though she had hoped he wouldn't. She had hoped he'd leave her to face this on her own, as she always had. Slowly, she turned, her hand still clutching the glass. Jack Callahan was standing there, his expression unreadable as he leaned against the doorframe. He had that same lazy, almost careless look about him, but Amelia could see the weariness in his eyes, the exhaustion of a man who had been running for too long. I told you I didn't need you, she said, her voice steady but lacking the conviction she had hoped to feel. She wanted to be strong, to stand her ground, but something about him, something in the way he stood there made her question everything. Jack didn't move. He just stood there, watching her, his eyes calculating. You don't need me, he agreed, his voice rough. But you sure as hell could use someone who knows how to fight back. She crossed her arms, her gaze narrowing. I can fight on my own. You think you can keep doing that? Jack asked, stepping closer, his boots clicking against the floor with each slow step. You think you can keep running this place by yourself without getting dragged under? Without losing everything you're trying to protect? Amelia didn't respond immediately. She didn't know how. She didn't know if she could answer him. She wanted to argue, to push him away, but the words caught in her throat. The truth was, she was tired. Tired of being alone in this fight, tired of the constant pressure, tired of the fear that gripped her whenever she thought about the future. Jack stopped a few feet from her, his eyes still on hers. For the first time there was no smirk, no cocky grin, just a hard, steady gaze that seemed to see right through her. Porter's not going to stop, he said, his voice quieter now, almost solemn. He's got more men, more power, and the longer you try to stand on your own, the worse it's going to get. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm just asking you to see the truth." Amelia looked away, her eyes focusing on the glass in her hand. She couldn't look at him. Not when everything he said made too much sense. Not when she had been trying to ignore the obvious. "I don't want anyone's help," she said, her voice small now. "I've never needed anyone." Jack stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But you need someone now. You can't do this alone, no matter how hard you try. You're not your father, and you're not some lone ranger out here. You're just a woman trying to survive in a world that's trying to kill you." The words hit her like a slap. He was right, in a way she didn't want to admit. She had been fighting on her own for so long that it had become second nature to her. But maybe that fight was one she couldn't win. Maybe she wasn't strong enough. She took a slow breath, steadying herself, and finally looked at him. "What are you offering?" "Jack?" He didn't answer immediately, but the faintest flicker of something, perhaps relief, crossed his face. "I'm offering you a chance," he said simply. "A chance to stop running, a chance to stand your ground and protect what's yours. But you've got to make a choice. Either you keep fighting this alone, or you let someone who knows how to handle it help you." She knew what he was asking. He was asking her to let him in, to let him help her fight, to let him be the ally she didn't want but might need. It was everything she had resisted for so long, letting someone close, trusting someone else with her fate. Amelia was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on her. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, the warning he had given her so many times about trusting anyone. But Jack wasn't just anyone, and if she were honest with herself, she knew that. "You can help me," she said finally, her voice steady. "But if you betray me, if you try to take what's mine, I'll kill you." Jack didn't flinch. He just nodded, his face grim. Fair enough. For the first time, there was a strange kind of understanding between them. The tension that had been between them for so long seemed to dissipate, replaced by something else, something unspoken but understood. They were in this together now, for better or worse. Amelia took a deep breath and turned toward the door. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, but she didn't have the luxury of time to figure that out. She had a ranch to protect and a fight to win. "Let's go," she said quietly, pushing the door open. Jack followed her without hesitation, the weight of the decision now settling on both their shoulders. The night had settled in fully, the moon casting a pale glow over the quiet town, as Amelia and Jack walked side by side through the dusty streets. Her boots clacked on the wooden boards of the sidewalk, the sound sharp in the stillness of the night. She had agreed to let him help, but as they walked together, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered between them. Every step she took toward this uncertain alliance felt like another betrayal to the walls she had built around herself. Jack didn't speak as they moved. His steps were steady, his presence more like a shadow than a companion. He wasn't pushing her, wasn't asking for anything more than the space she had given him, but every now and then, she caught glimpses of him, his eyes scanning the darkened streets, as if he were always waiting for something to happen. For a moment, it felt like the whole world was on edge, and Amelia couldn't decide if it was just her or if Jack was right about the danger closing in around them. As they neared the edge of town, Amelia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the land around her. The ranch was just beyond, a place where she had spent her entire life fighting to survive. It felt strange, though, having someone beside her now, especially someone like Jack. She had spent so many years protecting this place alone, pushing everyone away to ensure it stayed hers. Yet, as much as she hated to admit it, she knew she couldn't keep fighting on her own anymore. The pressure was too much. Jack glanced at her, his voice low. "You think you're ready for this?" Amelia didn't look at him as she answered, her gaze fixed ahead on the ranch that was fast approaching. "I don't have a choice." Jack was quiet for a moment, and then he nodded. "I get it." They reached the edge of the ranch, and Amelia felt a tightening in her chest as she dismounted. She had never felt more disconnected from the place she had grown up. The ranch had always been hers, her inheritance, her legacy, but now it felt like a burden she wasn't sure she could carry. Porter's threats, the pressure to protect everything her father had built, it was all weighing on her. And the fact that Jack was here, walking beside her as if he was just another part of the equation, made her heart ache with something she couldn't define. She had never needed anyone, but now, in this moment, she wasn't so sure. Jack's voice broke through her thoughts. "We need to be prepared. They'll come for you, and they won't stop until they've taken everything." Amelia looked at him now, meeting his gaze. His expression was serious, and for the first time since they'd crossed paths, she saw the weight he was carrying. Jack Callahan wasn't just some cowboy passing through. He had scars, and they weren't just physical. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp. The question had been in her mind for a long time, but now, in the stillness of the night, it seemed to demand an answer. Jack looked away for a moment, his eyes drifting to the horizon. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything." His voice was low, almost haunted. "And I've been on the wrong side of this fight before. I won't let you make the same mistakes I did." There was something in his voice that made her stomach tighten. Amelia didn't speak for a while, but she felt it. The depth of his pain, the shared understanding between them. He wasn't just a stranger, not anymore. He was someone who had lived through the same brutality, the same struggle she was facing, and for a fleeting moment, she wondered if he was right about what he had said earlier, about her not being able to do this alone. She pushed the thought away. "I'm not like you," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I'm not someone who relies on others." Jack turned his gaze back to her, his eyes searching hers. "Maybe you don't have to rely on me, but it doesn't hurt to have someone watching your back." Her heart raced at the thought. He was offering her something she had never allowed herself to have: trust. The idea of it was foreign, uncomfortable, but somewhere deep inside she couldn't deny the truth. She needed it. They walked together toward the house, the silence between them heavy but not unpleasant. The front porch came into view, the familiar outline of the house standing against the dark sky like a sentinel, but it didn't feel like home anymore. The place where she had grown up, the place where her father had raised her to be strong, now felt hollow. The walls that once protected her now felt like they were closing in. Jack's voice broke the quiet again. "If you're serious about this, we'll need to fortify everything. Secure the ranch, get supplies, and set traps if we need to. Porter isn't going to be the only one after what you've got. The West doesn't care who's right or wrong. It just wants what it wants." Amelia stopped at the steps, her hand resting on the railing. "I'll do what I have to do." Jack stepped up beside her, his presence almost overwhelming now. "I'm with you," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But only if you're ready to face what's coming." Amelia looked out at the ranch once more, the silence of the night settling around her. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know if she was ready for what was coming, but one thing was clear: she couldn't keep running from the fight. And with Jack at her side, she might just have a chance. "I'm ready," she said, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. "Let's get to work." The door creaked as she opened it, stepping inside the house that had been both a refuge and a prison. The storm was coming, but Amelia was no longer alone. The air inside the house was stale, untouched by the outside world, as if time had stood still here. Amelia moved through the darkened rooms, the floorboards creaking underfoot, her mind spinning with everything she needed to do. She had always taken care of the ranch herself. Her father had taught her how. But now, everything was different. She could no longer ignore the feeling that her world was slipping through her fingers, that something was coming for everything she held dear. Jack followed her inside, his presence heavy but not unwelcome. He didn't speak at first, merely glanced around the room, assessing. The silence between them was thick, as if both were waiting for the right moment to break it, to make some sort of sense out of the chaos that had taken over their lives. "Where do we start?" Jack asked finally, his voice low and steady as if he already knew the answer. He'd seen enough of the West to know the dangers, to understand what it took to survive. Amelia paused at the small wooden table near the window, her fingers trailing over the chipped surface as if the worn wood could offer her some kind of comfort. She felt the weight of the decision hanging over her. The ranch, her father's legacy, it all hinged on what she did next. "We secure the perimeter," she said, her voice gaining strength as the reality of it all settled in. "We set traps. We can't let Porter, or anyone, just waltz onto the land like they own it." Jack nodded, his gaze sharp, taking in everything around him. "Good. We'll need to move fast. Get the fences repaired, set up a watch. But more than that, you need to get some help, people you can trust." Amelia flinched at the suggestion, her fingers tightening on the edge of the table. Trust. The word felt foreign to her, like something she couldn't afford. She had spent so many years trusting no one, relying only on her own strength, her own ability to survive. "I don't need help," she said, her voice tighter than she intended. "I can handle this on my own." Jack turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You can't fight a war alone. Amelia, you can't protect the ranch by yourself, not when there are people like Porter out there." The words struck harder than she expected. For a moment, she felt the weight of it all, the endless battle that had already worn her down. She had always fought alone, never allowing anyone to get close enough to help her, to see her vulnerability. But now, standing in the house that once felt like a fortress, she realized Jack was right. She couldn't do this alone. "Who do you suggest?" she asked, her voice softer now, more resigned. Jack's gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something genuine in his eyes. "There are always people out here, people who owe favors, people who need a little coin. It's not much, but it's a start." She looked at him, studying his face. There was more to Jack Callahan than he let on. He wasn't just a drunk cowboy with a sharp tongue. He had a history, and it was one that seemed to echo her own. Broken, battered, but still fighting. And in that moment she realized that maybe he wasn't the enemy she had made him out to be. Maybe he was the ally she never knew she needed. "All right," she said quietly. "We'll do it your way, but I'm not trusting anyone until I have a reason to." Jack gave her a small nod. That's fair. I wouldn't expect anything else." The silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't as heavy. They were in this together, whether she liked it or not, and as much as she hated to admit it, she needed him. She needed someone who understood this world, someone who had seen the dangers that lay ahead. "We start tomorrow," Amelia said finally, taking a step toward the door. "Get some rest, we've got work to do." Jack didn't argue. He didn't need to. He knew the fight they were about to face would take everything they had, and even then, it might not be enough. The next morning came too soon. Amelia woke before the sun, the air still cool with the remnants of the night. She pulled on her boots and grabbed her rifle, checking the ammo out of habit, out of necessity. The ranch needed work, and it needed it fast. Every moment wasted could be the one that made the difference between life and death. Jack was already outside, standing by his horse, the same calm demeanor on his face that he always wore. But Amelia saw the tension in his shoulders, the quiet readiness that came from years of surviving in a world that took everything without asking. They worked through the day, repairing fences, setting traps, and scouting the perimeter of the ranch for signs of anyone who might be lurking. Amelia was quick to give orders, her mind always 2 steps ahead. It wasn't her first time in a fight, and it wouldn't be her last. But the sense of urgency in the air was different now. The stakes had changed. It wasn't just about protecting land anymore. It was about protecting everything her father had worked for and everything that had been passed down to her. By late afternoon, the sun was beginning to dip low in the sky, painting the world in shades of gold and orange. They were sitting outside, taking a short break, when the sound of hooves broke the silence. Amelia stood quickly, her hand going instinctively to her gun. "Easy," Jack said, his voice calm. "I told you there'd be people." The rider appeared on the horizon, a silhouette against the fading light. Amelia squinted, trying to make out the figure. "I don't recognize him," she said, her grip tightening on the rifle. Jack stood up, his movements slow but deliberate. "That's not important. What's important is whether he's here to talk or cause trouble." The rider came closer, and Amelia's breath caught as she saw the man's face clearly. It wasn't just anyone. It was Will Porter. The ground seemed to shift beneath Amelia's feet as she saw Porter's figure materialize against the fading light. The sight of him wasn't just a reminder of the danger she was facing. It was a cruel twist of fate. She had known this confrontation was coming, but the reality of it hit her harder than expected. He was no longer just a name whispered in the corners of town. He was standing here, on her land, under the very sky she had fought so hard to claim as her own. Amelia's grip tightened on the rifle in her hands, but Jack's voice cut through her thoughts, low and calm. "Don't do anything rash," he said. "Shh." Let's see what he wants first." Porter was almost upon them now, his horse steady, his dark eyes locking onto Amelia. He didn't look surprised to see her standing there, and the sneer on his face suggested that he had expected this moment, just as she had. The ranch had been his target from the very beginning, her father's blood, the land that had belonged to his family, and now Amelia herself. Amelia didn't move as Porter dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth. His coat swayed with the movement, and his hand hovered near his gun belt. He wasn't here to make peace, she knew that much. She didn't know if he was here to settle old scores or stake his claim, but she wasn't about to let him walk away with anything. "Thought you'd be hiding by now," Porter said, his voice dripping with condescension as he looked her up and down. "But here you are, standing tall, just like your father used to do. Too bad he couldn't fight his way out of what was coming for him." Amelia's breath caught in her chest. The words stung. The old wound her father's death had left opening once more. She fought the urge to snap back, but the memories of that day, the fire, the loss, the betrayal, made her want to reach for her gun and silence him for good. "I'm not my father," Amelia said, her voice steady despite the bitterness she felt bubbling up. "But I'll make sure you don't make the same mistake with me." Porter laughed, a dark, hollow sound that seemed to echo through the quiet evening. "You're not your father, huh? You're a stubborn, scared girl who thinks she can play in a man's world. Your father's sins didn't die with him, girl. You're just as responsible. Don't talk about him." Amelia spat, stepping closer, the tension between them rising like a storm. "You have no idea what you're talking about." Porter's eyes glinted with something dangerous. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about. I've been hunting you and your father's legacy for years. And now it's time to pay the price. Jack stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on the grip of his revolver, but his eyes were focused on Porter, calculating, waiting for the right moment. Amelia could feel the pressure building between them. The words, the history, the anger, all of it suffocating the air. "Enough talk," Jack said, his voice firm. "You've got two choices, Porter. You leave this ranch now or we make you." Porter's lips curled into a smile, a sharp, cold thing. He didn't seem afraid. "You think I'm just going to walk away?" he asked. "You think you can threaten me? I've seen men like you before." But I'm not the one who's going to lose here. It's you. Your family's blood is already on my hands and I'm just here to collect the rest." Amelia's blood ran cold at the mention of her family's blood, but there was something else beneath the anger now, a sense of clarity. This wasn't just about land or vengeance. This was about power, about who got to hold the strings, who controlled this little corner of the West, and Porter thought he could claim it for himself. She stepped forward, her gun hand still steady, her eyes never leaving his. "You want my land? You'll have to kill me to get it." Porter's grin faltered for the first time, and for just a moment, Amelia saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged, not like this. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, girl," he growled. "You'll die, just like your father did, for nothing." "I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees," she said, her voice cold and unwavering. Jack's hand twitched at his gun, ready to draw, but Porter's men, more than she had anticipated, suddenly emerged from the shadows surrounding them. She hadn't seen them coming, but now she could hear the scrape of boots, the low murmurs of men who had been waiting for just this moment. There were at least 4 of them, all armed, all dangerous. Amelia's heart raced, but she stood tall. She wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. Porter's voice cut through the tension, his smirk returning. "You're outnumbered, girl. You and your little cowboy friend can't take us all on, but I'll make it easy for you. You give me the land and I'll let you walk away. No more bloodshed, no more families torn apart. You think I'm going to just hand this over to you?" Amelia's laugh was bitter. "I've worked too damn hard for this." "Then you'll die for it," Porter said, stepping back, gesturing to his men. But before anyone could make a move, a shot rang out, echoing through the night. It wasn't from Porter's men. Amelia turned in shock and Jack's hand was already on his gun, smoke rising from the barrel. One of Porter's men dropped to the ground, blood staining the dirt beneath him. The other men froze, looking between their fallen comrade and the man who had fired without hesitation. Porter's eyes widened for a split second before his face hardened. "You shouldn't have done that," he snarled, but he knew the shift in power had already happened. Amelia's pulse raced, but she kept her gun raised, ready. This was it. The storm had finally come, and now they were in the thick of it. In the thick. "I don't care what you think, Porter," Jack said, his voice steady. "You're not getting away with this." Porter's men hesitated, looking at each other as if searching for an answer. They knew the odds had shifted. The fight wasn't over yet, but it had just become a hell of a lot more even. "I'm not running anymore," Amelia said, her voice clear, full of determination. "This is my fight now," and with that, the battle for the land, for everything she had fought to protect, began.
Hope you enjoyed the story. Comment where you're watching from, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel.